Good afternoon and welcome everybody to the KQ Conference 2021, Building Back Together. My name is Simon Kane and I am Chair of the KQ, and it's my real pleasure to invite you to this conference today, tomorrow and the following day to engage and enjoy and hear from a huge range of speakers. If you're a KQ member or a friend, welcome. It's great to have you here. If you're from the KQ region but not a member, or from outside, we'll also welcome you too. You know, this is an open conference, an open discussion, an important discussion, and we want it to be as open to as many people as possible. The Knowledge Quarter, for those that you aren't aware, consists of businesses, science, research institutes, cultural organisations, universities, charitable organisations, community organisations, from within a mile radius of the British Library. We have over 100 members to date and incredibly diverse membership. We are built around some key principles, which I want to reflect on in a second. Our conference here is talking about building back together, and we have three themes over the next 3 days: working together, which we're talking about today, learn together tomorrow, and grow together the day after. But just briefly reflecting on the 18 months that we've had, no one can have come through the last 18 months without having kind of profound effect on their own lives and on how they think and how they see themselves in the world and how they see the world. We have all lost friends and family. The way we work, the way we perceive work has changed. The way we think about what's important to us, what are our values, have really come to the fore as we've struggled to tackle this pandemic. And what's been really interesting is to see where the strength has come from in terms of responding to the challenge of the pandemic. And the KQ, we emphasise the importance of community, and communities and charities have stepped up over the last 18 months in a remarkable way to fill many of the gaps that have been left through the weakened structures of our social society, those social security structures that governments provide. And that's something that we really want to talk about, is this concept of good or sustainable growth. And that is growth which benefits everybody. We've heard before about, the trickle down effect and of investment and so forth, but actually, are we really seeing that? And one of the themes we want to talk about today is, what does that good growth and sustainable growth look like? And we mean sustainable in every sense: environmentally sustainable for communities, and also sustainable for businesses, as we think about the future of work and think about working in different ways. Because if we've learned anything from this pandemic, it's the importance of compassion, the importance of equity, and understanding diversity in all its forms. And those values are the values of the KQ: compassion, equity, and diversity. And we are really interested in pursuing those with our members, who we view as partners, to look at how we build sustainable growth into the future. And thinking about the issue of diversity, we have a diversity of speakers for you across these 3 days. There's a diversity of gender, there's a diversity of ethnicity, and there's a diversity of job roles and the kinds of organisations that are being represented. We have government, local and central government, we have voluntary organisation, we have other public sector organisations, charities, and many cultural organisations, and many others, and you'll see that as we go through the next 3 days. One of the great things, one of the good things that's come out of this pandemic, if there are some, is our ability to connect online, and we've become more adept, have a better understanding of how this medium works, what its limitations are. And I think one of the benefits is attending conferences like this is actually a little bit easier. We can work from wherever we are, our workspace, or maybe at home, or wherever you are, and we can engage. I think the downside is it's really easy for us to have other pressures and to be distracted and think, well, I just need to go away and deal with that email or that email and have that quick meeting. And I know, because I've done this. But I'd really encourage all of you to stick with us today if you can. Stick with us and stick with all the way through the program. So I just want to finish there, say thank you all very much for attending. Have a great day. I will be back here tomorrow, and enjoy the conference. Over to you, Pat.
Great, thank you so much, Simon, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this lovely sunny day, sunny and rainy. It's a bit of a mix, but thank you all for coming, those who've made the effort to join today. Before we kick off with our first keynote for the conference, we'd like to present a short presentation produced by one of our partners, the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment. Rameau's Le Inde Goulon, I hope I pronounced that correctly, is a modern interpretation by students from Ackland Berkeley School. In September 2020, the orchestra entered into a partnership with Ackland Berkeley School in Camden and have been working with the students on lots of exciting new projects. In this video, a group of Year 10 students can be seen performing an original dance that they choreographed for their GCSE exam, accompanied by the orchestra performing Rameau's music. The collaboration is an important first step in demonstrating how working together can enrich an appreciation of the arts and reinforce the positives when joining forces creatively. To make this a reciprocated creative experience, the students were given their own agency in carving out the framework of the project. Taking inspiration from Baroque dances on YouTube, the students were drawn to Rameau's music. This particular dance, with a strong and distinctive rhythmic pulse, sparked enthusiastic discussion and allowed the music and choreography to evolve hand in hand. It's a short performance, only a few minutes. We hope you enjoy it. Now, the volume starts off a little bit low. Don't worry, don't panic. And then it gets louder and louder. I hope you enjoy it. I'm absolutely thrilled that Kajal Odedra, who's a writer and activist with over 13 years of experience in the campaign sector, has agreed to join us. Kajal is the UK Executive Director for Change.org, which is the largest petition platform. She's grown the platform to over 19 million users in the UK. She's supported some of the biggest people and powered campaigns in the UK, from Laura Croyton's campaign to end the tampon tax to Richard Ratcliffe's fight to free his wife Nazanin from prison in Iran. After identifying a diversity problem in the UK campaign sector, she founded the People of Colour in Campaigns Network. She's on the board for Save the Children UK and Ada's List. Her first book, Do Something, Activism for Everyone, A Guide to Grassroots Activism, is out now. Welcome, Kajal.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to speak with you all today. I think if you can share my slides, is that happening? Yeah, great. Okay, so the theme of the conference today is building back together. And I want to make the case that in order to do this, we all need to adopt the mentality of activists. But first, let me start by telling you a little bit about me. If we go to the next slide. This is a picture of me and my mum, and it was taken when we'd recently moved to Derbyshire back in the early 90s. Before then, we were living in Leicester in a predominantly Black and Asian community. And when I was around 6 or 7, we moved to a white working class village called Newhall. When we arrived, the environment that we arrived to was hostile. We experienced a lot of pushback, racism that was both physical and verbal. some of the most difficult memories aren't actually the instances of abuse that me or my family experienced. But for me, some of the harder memories are those memories of asking for help from the police, local authorities, or teachers, and not being taken seriously. So this was my childhood, and I understood early on that not everyone is treated equally, and that sometimes you have to really fight to get heard. I decided that I wanted to do something about this, and if we just go to the next slide, I started my career in the charity sector, and it was really inspiring. I started working from some amazing organizations and fulfilling this desire I had to kind of, help people who I thought weren't being treated equally in society. And it was really fulfilling to dedicate my time in this way, and for people, to see if you put strategy and energy and resource into things, then people's rights can be taken seriously. But there was something bugging me during these years. I noticed a tendency in the sector to speak on behalf of service users rather than empowering them to speak for themselves. So I'd work for organizations, and if there was a big campaign or a big news story where the organization needed to be on the news and comment, rather than actually asking those people who had experienced the issue and helping them to get ready for the interview and actually speak for themselves, we would often, get the head of policy or the chief executive on the news. And that seemed to me, it was kind of against everything that I'd learned as I was growing up, which was that, it is those people who are experiencing the problems that have the most legitimacy to speak about those issues. And I was also, this was early 2000s, I was also struck by the whiteness in the sector. So, the charity sector, and I went into that because I was from a marginal community, from a working class family, woman of color, and I expected to find other people like me who maybe had felt that they were overlooked in society. But actually what I found was that there was actually a lot of power and privilege at play within the sector itself, which actually led me to start the People of Colour in Campaigns Network that Meta mentioned at the start. Now, my activism is supporting people, especially those from marginal groups, to be heard and to disrupt that status quo that stopped me and my family from being heard when I was growing up. And it's to help people like Lindsay. If we go to the next slide. This is Lindsay Garrett and her 8-year-old daughter. I met them a few years ago, and when they were facing homelessness along with 92 other families, because an American property company had bought their estate in Hoxton, so not far from the King's Cross area. You might have heard of it. It was called New Era Estate. One day, out of the blue, Lindsay got a letter through her door saying that the company was planning to hike up their rent by 3 times. So a rent of around £600 would go up to £1,800. They were told to sign the letter or make a plan to leave by the next year. As a single mum and an NHS worker, Lindsay just could not afford that. But she'd lived in Hoxton her whole life, along with 3 generations of her family. And there were so many families like that who had that area in their blood and that estate itself. I think Lindsay's family actually had all grown up in that estate. Because for decades, the New Era estate had been protected as affordable housing in a city that was pushing out locals with sky-high rents. London was on the brink of a housing crisis because of property companies like this. So Lindsay wanted to do something. She wanted to fight for her home, and she didn't want to just take it lying down. She held meetings with other residents and started planning a campaign. I mean, I don't think at the time she was thinking of it as an actual campaign. They were just thinking, we've got to fight this. But that's where some of the best, greatest campaigns happen. And that's when we met, because in an attempt to get their story heard, they started a petition on change.org. Once that petition caught fire, the campaign was unstoppable. and local resident Russell Brand threw in his support. The mayor of New York spoke up, saying that they would never allow this kind of thing to happen in their city. And we organized a petition delivery. If you just go to the next slide, this picture was taken on the day of that delivery with Russell Brand, Lindsay at the front in the center, her daughters there at the bottom, and then the other mums who fought alongside her. I remember this day quite vividly because this was the day that I realized that the campaign had really turned into something else. We were organizing the petition delivery, and we planned for to meet outside of the Property Developers UK London office. And we were going to invite supporters to meet us there, and then we were going to do a march from that office all the way down to Downing Street to hand in the petition. The day before, I remember speaking to my colleagues and kind of saying, what if nobody turns up? What if it's just us and Lindsay and, Russell? And we thought, okay, even if nobody turns up, we'll just make the most of it, and we'll take loads of photos, and we'll have handed in the petition and into Downing Street, and we'll get this great shot outside of Downing Street. And on the day I went to meet them, and I had those boxes with me on this trolley, and I was walking, I think the office was in Mayfair, and I turned the corner to get to the office, and I just saw 500 people all just gathered around, milling around, waiting for somebody to tell them what to do. I hadn't quite appreciated until this moment how many people had their imaginations had really been captured by this campaign. We had, I think on this picture it says 293,000 signatures on the petition, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's how many people are going to be willing to leave their house during a weekday morning to come to London and to come to a protest. So there were hundreds of people, and because we hadn't expected this, we hadn't really planned for it, and so the police obviously had turned up, and had to ask them very nicely if they would help me shepherd 500 people from Mayfair to Downing Street. And but the only problem was nobody was following me because I'm quite short, and they were all just enamored by Russell Brand. And so I had to ask him to follow me. And so you had this group of 500 kind of following a very tall Russell Brand, who was following a very short me as we walked across central London, the police stopping traffic. We went through Piccadilly, Leicester Square, and got down to Downing Street. And we hadn't actually put Russell's name on the Downing Street form to come to, past the gates. And so we had to have a very tricky conversation with the security guards, who were actually very nice. And they agreed at the last minute to allow him through because they believed who he was. That was really one of the most pivotal moments of the campaign because of the amount of support it got, but also because the campaign then went from a London story to national news. Within months of Lindsay's petition going viral, and before long, the property company gave up and sold the estate to a housing charity. I think this story was very reminiscent of the miners' strike and the fight for equal pay by Ford factory workers in the 60s. It captured the country's imagination in telling the story of 93 Davids versus a massive Goliath. This property company was faceless. It was a US company that was so far away from us. We looked on the website, and it wasn't even clear who ran this organization. You couldn't get names of the chief exec, of the board members. So it felt very difficult to be able to really target the decision maker here. So they really felt like a Goliath. But unlike former campaigns, New Era won in a matter of weeks, really because the internet had taken this beautifully kind of compelling story and the campaigning and turbocharged it, making solidarity and mobilization bigger and faster and more powerful than ever before. Now, let's go to the next slide. What can we learn from this story for rebuilding our communities post-pandemic? It's an old campaign. I worked on it maybe, I think 5 or 6 years ago. but it actually has so many timeless lessons. And the first lesson is about passion. Lindsay was passionate about this because it affected her life and her child's life. It was her lived experience that propelled her. Now, the term lived experience has become a bit of a cliche in the sector, but what it really means is that Lindsay's experience made her an expert on housing issues, just as much of an expert as the housing minister or a chief executive of a housing charity. Because a working class single mum couldn't be told no because she spoke from a place of honesty and truth and experience, the kind of experience that none of those others, the housing minister or the CEO, had. It's also important for people with those lived experiences to speak up because it leads to better decision making. Often, the people making big decisions in society have similar life experiences, education, and perspectives. But a diversity of beliefs, perspectives, and styles can lead to a de-biasing impact on complex decisions. It lowers the likelihood of groupthink, and it makes it easier to come up with out-of-the-box ideas. And finally, it creates trust, because when you bring people into the fold, they're more likely to continue on the journey with you because they trust that they will be heard if things aren't going well. Next slide. The second lesson is on precision. When campaigning, it's a common mistake to go big and try and solve it all with a big, ambitious campaign ask, like petitioning the government to fix the whole of the housing crisis or asking the G7 to end climate change now. At Change.org, we see people launch hundreds of campaigns every day on issues affecting their individual lives and their communities by highlighting a tangible problem. It can be that first step to a big systemic change. Lindsay's campaign started a people-powered movement and public conversation about the national housing crisis, but she never set out to do that. She simply wanted a US property company to allow her and the other families to live affordably. But it was the specifics of the issue that captured the nation's attention, because this one story in Hoxton represented so many others. And the final lesson, if we just go to the next slide, is persistence. The people who don't give up are the ones who end up winning. If you're passionate about a cause, you're much more likely to persist with it. The people that we work with, in my years of campaigning and working with activists, it's those that remain determined, that maintain this dogged belief that they're right and that the victory is achievable. They're the ones who go on to win because they don't give up, because giving up isn't an option. The key to creating change is to keep going. And the next slide, what can organizations learn from this story? And I just have one lesson here: listen. And I mean really listening. Real listening is a skill. It's active, intentional. It's not waiting to say your piece. If you're really listening, you're open to changing your mind. The residents of New Era are now consulted closely on the big decisions the housing charity that owns the estate want to make. They have a great relationship with the decision makers, and it makes the entire estate a healthier, happier place. Too often, leaders in organizations think they have to present a front to their service users or customers or staff. But when you're honest and transparent and open to listening, you're telling people that you trust them. I've seen so many examples from the work that we do of better decisions being made when decision makers are open their door and start engaging. I think this point is particularly important because it drives home something that I believe deeply. Great leadership is not about you. It's about the people that you are leading and serving those people. And you can't do that unless you demonstrate active, intentional listening. So we'll just go on to the final slide. COVID has caused endless harm to our lives. As we heard in the opening speech, the chaos and disruption it has caused pulled out the thread holding our society, our organizations, our own lives together. And what we decide to do next in stitching it all back together is critical. Will we simply stitch it back together as it was before, or create something new, something better altogether? Some of these challenges are existential, and some of them won't go away unless they're approached in a new way. my message to you today is we need to seize this chaos as an opportunity to reset, reimagine the future of the UK, and to shape it for the better. And we will only really do this if we all, organizations, institutions, the public, all believe that change is possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. We've got a few questions that we're going to put to you before we move on. I was struck by what you said, we should all be activists. I know you've got a book that's come out that's telling us all how we can do it. But if there were young people or people of all ages who live in the Knowledge Quarter area who are unhappy with things happening in their area, they're unhappy about the lack of opportunities that they've got, whether it's working, whether it's skills, whether it's educational opportunities. And if they want to take control in their own hands, what top tips would you offer to those people, for those communities?
Yeah, I would first of all say that, back to that point about passion, it's don't be deterred by the fact that you are a young person or you're not in those kind of, positions of power, because often actually it's your experience and who you are that will actually make you more powerful. Tell your story. Storytelling is the most powerful tool, in my opinion, in activism and in an activist's belt. It's how you get supporters engaged. It's how you get journalists to tell your story. It's how you get decision makers to actually sit down and listen to you. And so it's your experiences that is really the source of your stories. Often when we come across petitions on our platform, we actually have to really speak to the petition starter. We reach out to them and we actually have to speak to them to really find out more about their own story, because people don't really realize the power of their experiences. Often it's on the phone where we'll find out, oh, Lindsay's campaigning about this because she lives on the estate, because she's got kids on the estate, because 3 generations of her family were on the estate. All of that came out through talking to her and going, this is your story, like tell it, it's your power, And then the point about precision is like, be specific with your campaign. Don't just if you're not happy with the area, don't first of all be specific with the decision maker. So really think about who it is in that area or that institution that can really change the decision. Too often I think people target the prime minister or the head, the chief executive, but actually it's probably somebody a little bit further down the line that could be the critical decision maker who really needs to hear from you. And also, really being tangible about what you want to change. And then finally is just don't give up. I think that's easier said than done, and especially today's world, things that happen so fast, we lose our attention so quickly. But actually, it's the campaigns like, you mentioned Laura Corrigan in the introduction. She kept on, I think many of us thought that her campaign was going to win within a few months, and it was a 2-3 year campaign, but she won in the end, because she just didn't give up. And I think then decision makers often think, oh, they'll run out of energy soon and then it will blow over. You need to show them it's not going to blow over, that you're not going anywhere.
Yeah, and I know your advice to organizations is to listen. But very often one of the complaints that we do hear from local communities and local people is that, well, we're doing the talking and organizations are listening, but then actually nothing's happening after that. So how can you can be a little bit firmer with us, Kajal? Tell Knowledge Quarter organizations who are attending this call and who are listening to this session, tell us, other than listening and after listening, what are the next things that we ought to be doing?
Well, if you're really listening, you know what the next thing is. But I think what's been what the problem is, and I've and I'll kind of speak to an example in a minute. One of the problems is that people previously always thought of listening as like, got to tick that box off, and then we'll move on to the next stage, because maybe there's this perception that if you show that you're listening, then the problem will go away. That's all that person wants, is just to be heard. But actually, listening and a conversation is a two-way street. And what that means is really hearing what the problems are and then co-creating what the solutions can be together. When after George Floyd, our own organization at change.org had a moment of reckoning. We had to ask ourselves, because we're a global organization, we're based in the US, is our leadership diverse enough? Is our board diverse enough? Are we practicing anti-racism truly on a daily basis? And we realized that all of those, the answers to all of that was like, no. And what we did was we paused the organization for a month to have a reset, and we basically created committees of staff from a mixture of seniority, age, gender, and global region, and we asked them to explore different pillars of the organization, including how decisions are made, and they came back and they reported out to leadership, and most of those decisions have been signed off. Most of the changes that they requested have been signed off because we paused to listen. And I think often with listening, people think that means just pausing and then you're not really listening to what the other person is saying because you're getting ready to respond. But really listening means you don't know what's going to happen next because you need to actually hear from the other person.
Right. Yeah. In all the campaigns that you've managed or that you've run, Kajal, what's the most successful in Europe, or the one that you feel is the most successful in all these years?
That's a really hard question. I mean, it's a really, really hard question because we've had some huge campaigns, and some of them, Richard Ratcliffe's fight to free Nazanin, she's still in prison. And, if you haven't signed the petition, sign it. It's change.org/free Nazanin. So, on the surface, that doesn't look like a victory, but that campaign has many people in Richard's position are told not to speak up because that they will put they're told by the Foreign Office, you'll put the person's life at risk if you speak up. It'll make it harder to get them out. But actually, that's a great way of just keeping families quiet. Richard didn't do that. And it's one of those few campaigns where if I just say Nazanin, people know what I'm talking about. Yeah. It started a conversation with campaigners and the government about how we treat prisoners abroad. You as a British citizen think, like I thought, if I get locked up abroad, the UK government will help me. There's actually nothing in legislation to say that they need to do that. And so it started a conversation about our rights abroad and actually what the UK government's responsibility is. And it's made Nazanin feel so much less lonely. In this prison, around the other side of the world, she doesn't know that her name is recognizable just from the first word. But she does know that every Sunday when they speak on the phone, it's this many signatures now. And then Richard will sometimes read out comments to her from the petition. And there's been moments where he's asked people to send Christmas cards, birthday cards, and they will send them to Nazanin. And for somebody who's in isolation, I mean, it means the world to her. So, and it's been a real great sense of strength for Richard. So yeah, it's difficult to say. And the reason I mentioned the New Era one today was just because that was the first campaign. It was just one of those campaigns where everybody said it's never going to win, because there was no reason for this luxury property developer company to back down. There was no incentive. And so everybody said it was not going to win. And so then the day that Lindsay called me up, just giddy, and I was on the bus, and she just said they're going to back out and they're going to sell it off to a charity. I was just like, wow, nothing is impossible. So it's those moments that kind of, I guess they make you think about things differently, and those two campaigns really have.
Sure. And finally, just the last question, more sort of trying to probe about your own personal journey, Kajal. It's remarkable you, at a very young age, have done so much amazing work in the field of activism. You've enabled people from all different types of backgrounds. But how did it all begin? What was the sort of turning point in your life that made you feel this is the area of, you know, you're not doing what a typical Asian person might do, an Asian girl, of you know, for that matter. But what's made you feel that this is the area of work that you want to do? There might be, I'm mindful, there might be young people from minority ethnic communities from the Knowledge Quarter who are either listening to this live or who will listen to this later on, who are probably thinking, how can I become like Kajal in years to come?
And we spoke a bit about this when we were chatting for this, and talked about how, you know, growing up, we didn't really have people who looked like us in, at least for me, I mean, I grew up in the Midlands. I just didn't see those kinds of role models. And so as much as I cringe at the idea of being a role model, because it just feels a little bit grandiose, I do think it's really important that, you know, young people of color do realize, and especially from working class communities, do realize that, you know, you don't, that you can be, for them to see the things that they could be. And I guess for me, you know, there's a couple of things that were key. One, I've got 3 other sisters, so there's four girls in the family, and I think, you know, our parents never treated us like typical girls. You know, we were never held back, and I think that was quite progressive for an Indian family from my community, where often, you know, the girls are made to learn to cook, and you know, your sights aren't set very wide or far from a young age. And then I'd say it was really, you know, experiencing, if we hadn't moved from Leicester, from this Black and Asian community, and experienced what it felt like to be not accepted in society when we moved to the white working class village, I'm not sure, who knows what would have happened, but that really developed a sense of fight in me, because I saw my dad and my mum just fight back every day. They ran a shop, and so it was very visible, you know, them kind of trying to get help from the authorities, and just being stubborn and persistent. They never gave up, you know. And eventually, years later, those the crime really died down and the racism stopped because they continued advocating for themselves. So I think that was really something that just absorbed in me. And then I just found myself on the school council, going to university, and I wasn't really conscious that this was campaigning. Went to university, was on the committee. I just had this desire to make sure that, you know, people's views were being heard. So it was kind of it happened subconsciously, I suppose, but I think it was always gonna happen.
Well, we're glad it's happened, as you are a role model, Kajal, and your book is fantastic. I picked up a copy at the British Library when I was in their bookshop last, and I've given it as a gift to lots of people in my family. So I recommend it. It's a great book. Do go and get it. And Kajal, thanks for joining us for our first keynote session of the Knowledge Quarter conference. We hope that we can invite you back again. I'd love for you actually to put you in the middle of a group of young students from, you know, Regent High or from one of the other schools in the Knowledge Quarter area. I think that they could learn a lot. I think you could really enjoy that experience as well. So we hope we can continue this conversation.
Yeah, I'd love that. Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Kajal. Thanks so much. Now, as you know, the theme of today is working together. Even before the lockdowns, instability was the defining characteristic of our labour market. Our welfare system has not adapted to the many changes in how people work and how they want to work. Knowledge Quarter organisations offer an abundance of career options and are at the forefront of the evolution of work in many new fields. But how can we ensure that such opportunities are afforded to everybody? We've had a year to reevaluate the benefits of working from home. How can we use this new understanding to make inclusive improvements to our working practices? We're going to look towards finding answers to these and other questions in our next panel, The Future of Working Together. I'm delighted to introduce the speakers for this panel. Jane Van Zyl became CEO of Working Families in September 2018. She has 12 years experience working in the third sector and has held senior leadership positions at a number of UK charities. She believes in the value of a fulfilling, balanced working life and its transformative power to create social connections, build self-esteem, and impact the wider community. She is a passionate advocate of equal opportunity for all. James Goodman is Director of Partnerships and Learning at Local Trust. He is responsible for developing and delivering partnerships, collaborations, and ideas that can support the long-term goals of the Big Local programme and promote a positive future for communities through hyperlocal, place-based, resident-led change. James joined Local Trust from Forum for the Future, the internationally sustainability non-profit where he was Director of Futures and Projects. He has worked on a range of issues such as energy and climate change, social enterprise, the digital economy, sustainable food and agriculture, corporate sustainability, and the future of civil society. Gosh, so much there. Nishma Goswami, OBE. I think Nishma's trying to connect, a camera's trying to connect, but I'll introduce her and hopefully she'll be able to join us very, very quickly, or we'll be able to see her at least very, very quickly. Nishma is financial services partner at Bain & Company. Her work focuses on human capital transformation as well as the future of work and culture. Nishma has nearly 2 decades of Big Four consulting experience across geographies, throughout which she has architectured and deployed strategic people initiatives. Her breadth of expertise spans all facets of human capital, workforce strategy, reorganization design, cost reconstruction, and talent management. Nishma has been listed in the Financial Times' top 35 future leaders list. She was invested with an OBE in Her Majesty's 2020 Honours List for services to diversity and inclusion, pioneering gender pay gap reporting and the subsequent changes to the Equality Act. She has been honoured with numerous other awards, including Asian Professional of the Year at the Asian Achievers Awards, and was appointed a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. She's no stranger to the Knowledge Quarter. She holds a degree from University College London, where I met her for the first time 20 odd years ago. And also she studied at the London Business School. Our participatory chair for the session is Jack Salabank, a researcher, innovator, and writer, and founder of Future Places Studio, a place-based research and strategy studio. He consults in Hammersmith and Fulham Local Authority on their industrial strategy and economic response to COVID-19. He's the co-founder of a recruitment startup called Bricks, which is on a mission to place young people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds into entry-level employment positions in the knowledge economy. Thank you all for joining this panel. I'm going to hand it over to Jack.
Thank you very much, Bav. Jane and James, I imagine you're nervously hoping that Nishma joins, otherwise you've got a lot more work to do. Nishma, you've arrived just in time. Fantastic.
My apologies.
No, you were here just in time, so you're perfect. Before we get started, Bav, first of all, thank you very much for the introduction, and also thank you to everyone for joining this afternoon's conversation, and also thank you to the Knowledge Quarter for hosting this conference. It's a hugely important topics that you guys are tackling as part of this conference, so thank you for taking the lead on that. Now, we don't have a huge amount of time, but we have some big topics to try and get into, so I'm going to dive straight into questions. First of all, and Jane, be prepared, I'm coming to you first off the bat. Now, as Bav said, one of the challenges that we are looking at existed pre-pandemic, and that is the challenge of inclusive growth, how areas such as King's Cross and the Knowledge Quarter can evolve not only as economic beacons, but importantly, areas that promote and enable inclusive growth. And fundamental to this concept of inclusive growth is around creating better jobs, better job opportunities for the local communities that exist in and around the Knowledge Quarter. So Jane, first of all, from your perspective and your experience, how can areas such as the KQ and the member organisations that make up the KQ go about enabling more resilient job opportunities for the local communities to really achieve this ambitious ambition of inclusive growth?
Hello, everyone. Delighted to be here, and thanks for that question, Jack. For us, for working families, flexibility is the key. Flexibility allows people to manage their caring responsibilities and their work life. And certainly the big thing that I would add in is paying people the living wage. That is, from our perspective, absolutely vital. We hear from parents, working parents and carers all the time, who simply don't get enough hours to work and they're already working 2 or 3 jobs. So some of it is about ensuring that people actually have enough money to live on. And the rest then is about ensuring that people have the flexibility to be able to do the job they want to do, but also manage that with their caring responsibilities. And there are some really easy things that organizations can do. Look at the job design. Can it be done? Look at the ways in which you're recruiting people. Are you being reasonable about what you're expecting? So for example, if you're looking at a starter job, to say to somebody, you must have a 3-year degree. Really? What's the point of that? If it's for a very specific function, then absolutely. Train line managers. Make sure line managers understand what needs to be done and that they are as flexible as they possibly can be. But you can't ask line managers to do something differently if you don't show them how to do it. Advertise jobs flexibly, all jobs. Zurich Insurances have the most extraordinary success with their new recruitment campaign. And they've had 30% increase in applications across the board for all of the jobs they are advertising flexibly. And then culture change needs to be led from the top. The people that you're employing have to see that actually what the person at the top is talking about, they are also visibly modeling. So it's fairly easy.
Oh yeah, simple. Jane, we're going to pick up in a little bit more detail into some of that in a minute. But first of all, James, I quickly want to come to you and really thinking about a similar question, but through the lens of your experience. And Jane has sort of answered that from the perspective of what organisations can do. From your experience of working with local communities up and down the country, what is it that you think that they need with regards to support when it comes to this challenge of trying to move them closer to resilient job opportunities?
Thanks for the question. Yeah. So just to tell you a little bit about the perspective that I come from in answering that question. Local Trust is a charity with an endowment from the National Lottery to run the Big Local programme. The Big Local programme, it's quite a radical venture that was set up by the lottery about 10 years ago to kind of turn around grant giving and the way that local communities are supported, based on an observation that it's really difficult to get grant funding from foundations, charity foundations, but also from government into communities that really need it. And that, you know, if you think about a lottery, there's a lot of communities playing the lottery a lot, putting money in and not necessarily getting money out. And one of the reasons for that is that there's just not the awareness of grant opportunities or the capacity to fill in grant applications and participate in what is normally a competitive process to get money. And so the idea is to turn it around a little bit and almost like a kind of a universal basic income for communities, just choose 150 places that really had been missing out on funding and just offer them the money. And so 150 places were chosen across England, small places, neighbourhood level, communities of around 8,000 people, and they were offered £1 million, just over £1 million to spend over a period of 10 to 15 years on improving their locality. And those decisions to be made by residents, and with 10 to 15 years to spend money, that's a lot longer than normal grant programs. So what that does is it makes a foundational investment in the community and the way that the community functions, and leads over time, and our research is showing this, it leads over time to increases in confidence in the people who are involved in the program and increasing sense of agency. And there are stories after story of people who just get involved as a a volunteer on the periphery or go along to an event, then start getting involved in running things, and then before long, they're chair of the group, and being given those opportunities is incredibly important. So increases in individual power, sense of power and agency, and then that laddering up to the community actually being more active and organized and being able to cope with challenges. And we saw this in the COVID pandemic, that the places that were participating in Big Local, partly because they had the money, the volunteers, but also the experience of working together, were able to respond incredibly quickly to the challenges of getting food and medicine out to people who were isolating, much more quickly actually than, in many cases, than local councils and the other public agencies. So able to cope with those challenges, but also able to take those opportunities. So, I think inclusive growth was the question, and there's an implication in inclusive growth that there's a show going on somewhere in the centre, and that needs, that whoever's running that show needs to include people from communities, diverse communities, and communities far from the centre. And I would challenge that framing in a way, and that it's the other way around. And we need to focus on investing in supporting how communities function, how people connect within their communities, and build up an economy from there, rather than including those places in a centralized economy.
That's a great point, James. And I think, again, something very interesting that we can try and sort of unpick over the course of the next 45 minutes or so. Nishma, thank you for joining. Lovely to meet you. I want to come at this question to you, particularly from the sort of lens of the employer. And again, thinking around this challenge of inclusive growth, thinking about this challenge of employment opportunities, and if we kind of keep it contextual around the KQ, diversity and inclusion is obviously an increasing agenda amongst organisations. Again, you could argue that during the pandemic, it's been amplified and exacerbated. And of course, during the pandemic, during the last 18 months, of course, was the murder of George Floyd, which of course has kind of intensified the need for diversity and inclusion amongst organisations. Now, I'm going to take a optimistic view that diversity and inclusion could prove to be the sort of the unlocking of this inclusive growth opportunity. It's a difficult nut to crack, how you move people into resilient job opportunities. Could diversity and inclusion amongst organisations, if they are really focused on it and they truly commit to it, could it be the opportunity to help sort of unlock this pretty difficult challenge?
Thanks, Jack. I'm going to take that into two parts, if that's okay. It's quite a long question there. So if we just take a step back a little bit and think about what COVID-19 has done and the scale of workforce transitions set off by COVID-19's influence, if you like, on labour trends, for example. There's a real, in my view, an urgency for businesses and policymakers to take steps to support additional training and education programs for workers. And as a result, companies and governments have exhibited extraordinary flexibility and adaptability. Of course, one could say that we could be doing a lot more in responding to the pandemic with purpose, in my view, with innovation, that they might also harness to retool the workforce in ways that point to a brighter future of work in lots of different aspects. So I'll give you a couple of examples of where I'm going with this, and then come back to the sort of diversity and inclusion point, which actually falls into where we take this. Businesses can start with, in my view, a granular analysis of what work can be done remotely by focusing on the tasks involved rather than the whole jobs. And I think they could also play a larger role in retraining workers. And we've seen a lot of that, I think, particularly in the last sort of 2 months with organizations like Amazon, IBM, etc. And others have facilitated occupational shifts by focusing on the skills that they need rather than, and I think this was pointed out earlier on academic degrees. Remote work, I think, also offers companies the opportunity to enrich that diversity by tapping workers who, for example, wouldn't have necessarily been able to, because of childcare issues, for family or other reasons, unable to relocate to the superstar cities, as we call them, where talent, capital, and opportunities were concentrated before the pandemic. And certainly for the UK, that is very much London. And the US, one would argue, is that San Francisco. So I think it really makes a change in terms of what you're able to do, irrespective of the circumstances that you have as an individual. And then organizations are able to enrich that sort of diversity by tapping into those workers, particularly women who've been out of the workforce, for childcare reasons, etc., for a number of years. And whilst we've seen a number of programs in the industry inviting women who've been out of the industry for a while, it's not always been easy to integrate people back into the business. And so what this enables people to do is actually not have the sort of 2, 3, 4, 5 years out of their organization. I think there's a real role here for policymakers in terms of how they support businesses by expanding and enhancing the digital infrastructure. So even in advanced economies, almost 20% or so of workers in rural households lack access to the internet. So governments have a role here. They could also consider, for example, extending benefits and protections to independent workers and to build their skills and knowledge mid-career. And I think that's really important so that we don't lose that sort of mid-career workforce, which is where a lot of the dropout happens, particularly in the most competitive industries, such as the one that I come from, financial services. Both businesses and policy makers could collaborate to support workers migrating between occupations. I think there's a lot of talk around that at the moment, and we're hearing about the Pact for Skills, which is being established by the European Union and has been during the pandemic. But actually, there's been sort of 7 billion euros enhancing skills of something like 700,000 automotive workers. While in the United States, organizations like Merck have, really sort of invested to burnish the skills of Black workers, for example, that don't have a college education, but can create jobs that they can fill. So I think, in a nutshell, the reward of such efforts would be a more resilient, and somebody mentioned that earlier as well, more talented and a better paid workforce. And in return, as we know, a more robust and equitable society.
Absolutely. And just, Nishma, staying with you for a second, you mentioned your own sector, the financial services sector. Do you see that type of change taking place within your sector at the speed that you would like to see it happen?
So, Jack, if we're talking about diversity and inclusion to start with, we're seeing the sort of change across financial services that we would like to. I think that the pandemic has accelerated the level of change, in that enabling people to work from home, enabling people to work flexibly and without adaptability means that we're going to see more women stay in the workforce. More individuals from ethnic minority communities where they may have had other responsibilities, being able to stay in the workforce as well. Do I think organisations have more to do to accelerate change at more senior levels, particularly across sort of senior management and executive committees? Absolutely, and that change for me is still too slow.
Okay, thank you, Nishma. Important for me to say at this point that my understanding is that we are going to allow for 10 or 15 minutes at the end of this panel conversation for audience Q&As. So if you're not already, then please leave questions in the chat box, and we'll get to those questions at the end of the session. Jane, I'm going to come back to you, and I'm going to move the conversation on. We sort of naturally gravitated to the kind of the post-pandemic work, and of course we're all sort of figuring out what the post-pandemic world of work will look like. It really feels like we're in a moment of opportunity to redesign the structures around how we work, where we work, when we work, to put people, employees, front of center of that redesign, and to make the structures of work work for more people. I know that you guys have done a lot of work around this. What opportunities do you think exist as part of that redesign process?
We are excited about the future, absolutely. But a couple of things that I want to say. The pandemic, just to think back, may very well have been this, everyone may have found themselves in the same storm, but very many people were in very different boats, very leaky boats. And the pandemic highlighted a lot of inequality. So while an enormous number of people were able to work from home in a remote way, even while trying to balance and juggle homeschooling and childcare responsibilities and elder care responsibilities and all of those kinds of things, not everybody was able to do that. So anyone with a place-based job, so you literally have to be where people are, the NHS, of course, anybody who's responsible for cleaning anywhere, anybody who's responsible for driving a bus, you have to be where that job is. They haven't experienced that. And I think we need to be very mindful of thinking that what government is now calling hybrid working is only one small part of flexible working. We'd say almost every job has some flexibility in it somewhere. Whether or not that is rostering by the team understanding what needs to be done, when it needs to be done and how it needs to be done, and committing to one another as a team, but also to their employer to get those things done. We think that flexible working and certainly the ability to work from home, particularly for knowledge workers, can be hugely positive for people with disabilities, anybody who has mental health issues, anybody who needs to work in a slightly different way. So that is fantastic. And of course, organizations will have to provide the means for people to be able to do that, because not everybody had the same working from home experience. If you are in shared accommodation and you are spending your 8-hour day or your 7-hour day, whatever it happens to be, stuck in your bedroom, or if you're sharing a device, you can't do work. So the personal circumstances of the people that you employ needs to be considered. And you need to have equity across your ability to include people in. So where somebody may need an extra monitor because they've actually got a perfectly brilliant home setup, somebody else may need a laptop and a monitor and a keyboard and a mouse. So there are some challenges, even for smaller employers, about how they're going to afford these things. But certainly if you look at flexible working and you look at matching the job to what can be done, exactly as Nishma said earlier on, then for us, we think there is going to be some transformative change. We certainly hope so.
And are you seeing the businesses leading that change, or do you want to see more from government in terms of advice and guidance, or do you think businesses should be doing that on a kind of case-by-case basis?
We did a YouGov poll earlier this year, over the summer, and we asked working parents what it was that they wanted. They all wanted more flexible jobs. 84% of them wanted that to come from businesses. 70 odd said they wanted that to come from government. Our experience is that larger organizations who are genuinely interested in the welfare of their people who work for them, because they understand that that is their capital, they are investing in making all kinds of changes. We would like to see, when the employment bill comes in 22 or 23, that government is committed to making jobs advertised as flexible, because we think that would help enormously. Larger organizations are able to do things in a different way, but it needs to be pushed down. So for us, it's a policy issue, but absolutely, we can learn from employers. We have a range of employer members who are small businesses and much larger businesses. And the ability, that the things that they've been doing over the last 18 months have been extraordinary. And again, last summer, we asked them what was happening within their businesses. And all of them said productivity was either remaining the same or had improved. So standing over people isn't necessary. you can trust the people that work for you to do the job that they're given to do. So yeah, it needs to be business and government. And obviously it's an employment relationship. So there needs to be flexibility for both sides, for the employer and for the employee.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jane. James, I'm going to come back to you, and I'm going to pick you up on an earlier point that you raised as part of your first answer around inclusive growth, and that's particularly your I suppose perspective about how inclusive growth is framed, and actually it shouldn't be about big organizations trying to invite communities in, and actually framing it slightly differently. I agree wholeheartedly with you that realistically making that happen is obviously a much bigger challenge. And again, if we think about the kind of the KQ area and the speed of growth that area has kind of seen over the last 15 to 20 years, but also the industries which now call that area home, artificial intelligence, robotics, deep tech, deep science, moving at a really rapid pace, and a pace which again risks leaving a lot of people behind. So taking your perspective, how do you balance those two together?
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I mean, it's an extraordinary place, isn't it? And I think you're probably going to cover this a bit later in the conference as well. But there's this sort of notion of trickle down, that sort of wealth and sort of innovation and insight and agency kind of spreads out. I think that's been challenged, and that actually the extraordinary power and resources that are there in the Knowledge Quarter, there's some effort to be made to actually involve local people. I mean, there's all sorts of things that can be done around local procurement, but obviously the skills need to be there, the right businesses need to be there. So there's a lot that could be done in fostering those skills and fostering those businesses to develop in the local area. Getting involved in the neighborhood plan, working with local people and making sure those local people not only have the opportunity to have a voice, but have the capacity and confidence to participate in conversations with people on an equal footing, people who are maybe sort of coming from a professional background and doing it from a paid point of view, but they're doing it as volunteers who love their community and in their spare time. There's a real imbalance of power there. So there's all that stuff that can happen within the specific area where businesses are based. But and I think it's very important to acknowledge there is poverty in the local area, and there is inequality, definitely. But there is also a huge opportunity to sort of, I suppose, engage communities far beyond the KQ area because of the travel to work patterns that are there. And this is the opportunity that comes out of more working from home for those people who are able to. I completely agree with Jane that this is not the whole workforce by any means, but a lot of people will be commuting in to the stations there, tube and so on, and will be spending their opportunities to spend more time in their communities. And so there's an opportunity to foster some of that foundational growth in those communities beyond highly resourced central London. Can I pick up on what Jane was saying, actually, if that's okay, about the inequality of the impact, or the way that different people in different boats, because that really applies to communities as well. And not only were certain communities much more hit directly by the health crisis, but were actually helped much less as well. And the sorts of communities, there's some really interesting analysis that we've done at Local Trust, which looks at the role of social infrastructure. If you look at the most deprived communities in terms of economic performance and so on, in terms of poverty, and then you look at the communities which are actually just as deprived, but are also lacking in institutions or organizations that are locally rooted, in places to meet, and in connectivity, digital connectivity, transport connectivity, and so on. They're just as deprived, no more or less deprived, but their outcomes are much worse. Then their outcomes are worse in terms of skills, in terms of employment, in terms of job density, pay, health outcomes, and crime, and a number of other areas. It's this social infrastructure really makes a difference. It even made a difference in the response to the pandemic. So places lacking in social infrastructure were half as likely to have a mutual aid group than similarly deprived areas that had social infrastructure. So people weren't organising, people weren't responding. So, I see the opportunity of much more flexible working and so on. Yes, there's an opportunity within the central area, but there's an opportunity to foster that social infrastructure and participation in a much greater range of communities, and get those communities functioning, which means the fabric is there to support people when they want to get into jobs, get into employment, and improve their local neighbourhoods.
Absolutely. Thank you, James. Nishma, the title of today's panel is the future of working together, and I'm always interested when speaking to different organisations, particularly large organisations such as Bain & Company, to understand what the future of working together is for your organisation post-pandemic, and maybe you're still figuring that out. What are the early kind of learnings that you've taken from the pandemic, and how do you think they will be applied going forward, and particularly thinking in context of James' response and how Bain & Company can kind of take some of those learnings?
Yeah, I mean, Jack, I think that a lot of it has been covered, although, I could come at it from a sort of broader professional services perspective, and that would be focused around the adoption of digitization and automation technologies. And that has really accelerated how we intend to work going forward. So, as we all know, there are unprecedented restrictions on travel, physical interactions. Although, we're looking to come out of this sooner rather than later, we know that there are going to be changes in consumer behaviour since COVID-19 took place, which has forced organisations like mine and others to really think about the way in which consumers change the way they operate. And so, what it's done in turn is spurred digital transformations in a matter of weeks. Rather than months or years, and so non-essential workers have shifted to working from home. We did a big survey around our executives, and the results were that 85% or so came back to say that businesses have somewhat or greatly accelerated the implementation of technology that digitally enable employee interaction and collaboration, such as video conferencing, file sharing, employee interaction, etc. Can do. And roughly half of those surveyed reported increasing digitization of customer channels, for example, via e-commerce, mobile apps, or chatbots, etc. So, there's a real sort of change around that digitized supply chain, for example, by connecting suppliers with digital platforms in supply chain management. And I think that when you think of that adoption of automation technologies, including robotics, I think you mentioned autonomous vehicles and AI-driven software that can perform process workflows, it really sort of makes us as an organization think about whether we actually need to be, back in the office. I mean, there is a big aspect of you need to be able to meet your clients and your customers, and there is little that can change the face-to-face interaction. But there are trends reflecting automation's ability to facilitate contactless interaction, for example, at a time where, although social distancing rules will be lifted, and there will still be heightened awareness of hygiene as well as cost pressures, right, that will arise from an economic slowdown caused by the pandemic. So, there's a lot for us as an organisation to think about, but also what our clients are going to be doing. As you pick up the newspapers, lots of organisations make big statements around there is no need for any employee to come back to the office. If you do think you need to come back to the office, then you need to sort of go through the HR process, etc. And I think that as a lot of retail looks at their sort of proportion in size in the city in particular, there'll be a lot of focus around cost pressure, the slowdown, and then the awareness of how, a certain part of the population still isn't double vaccinated, and what do we do around that going forward? Large training events, for example, will they take place in the way they have historically? And one could also argue that the robotics has had such a huge impact on the way that we do business now that, when you think about cost pressures in particular, a statement came up on a call that I was on this morning, and somebody said, well, actually, the great thing is robots don't get sick. So there's a real reason why we need to move to a completely different way of thinking about what we do. I mean, we have seen through the pandemic how supermarkets, Amazon, etc., have completely changed consumer spending. The availability of cloud services, for example, it's really announced plans to step up investment as an indication to demand-related change in the workplace. And I think that doesn't just focus on private sector employees, but of course the community as a whole in terms of access to the way they do things. So in a nutshell, I would say that we're still in the process of thinking about what this is going to look like going forward, as are many other organisations. But there is certainly a need to combine seeing people and developing relationships and ensuring that you're looking after your employees and their well-being in particular, as much as there will be cost pressure due to an economic downturn.
Absolutely. Jane, just on that point of Nishma's with regards to her own organisation still figuring this out and other organisations doing the same, there does seem to be a bit of a split though with some company CEOs and chairmen coming out and saying, the office is the only place that you can do work. So as soon as we can, you're back in the office. Do you think, sort of maybe looking fast forwarding a couple of years, for those organisations that don't kind of move with these very rapid times, if you like, it could have an impact on their ability to recruit and retain talent if they don't respond to the changes that have happened over the last 2 years?
Yep, absolutely. Sorry about that being muted. Always happens.
You've had 18 months to get used to it, Jane.
I know, terrible. So what we're seeing when we ask working parents and carers is so many of them are telling us now is that the first thing that they will look at if they're looking for a new role, if they're looking to move, is how flexible is the job. And that's going to be their primary consideration, particularly for working parents and carers, where what's happening at the moment is that a lot of childcare settings are closing. And we think that's going to accelerate as we come out of the autumn. That's going to be an issue for so many parents. Now, you can't, working from home is no substitute for childcare. So we're not in any way advocating that people should work for home and have 4 or 5-year-olds around them. That's not going to be okay. But for many employers, we think that if the flexibility isn't there, it is going to be difficult for them to get the kind of talent that they want, both at a senior level and then also people to come in to do the entry-level jobs. Anecdotally, I've been very interested that a lot of the young people I know who are in their first or second jobs are really enjoying flexibility in terms of the ability to work from home occasionally, because actually they don't want to spend an hour and a half on the train every single day, much as they love going into these big super cities. And they also find that the gym around the corner is actually cheaper than the one next to the office. So for us, what we're hearing from working parents and carers, who after all are more than 40% of the working population, is that flexibility is going to have to be considered for them. And that's certainly what we are seeing. At the moment, though, time-wise, tell us that only 2 out of 10 jobs are advertised flexibly. So the other thing we think that organisations are going to have to think through is, if they're not advertising jobs flexibly, will they be in a position where they're stuck with a whole lot of people working for them who've got the flexibility they want but can't move on? So however much they're increasing their training budgets and however much they are upskilling those workers, actually they want to go somewhere else, but they're stuck because of the flexibility they have.
Absolutely. So we've got roughly 4 or 5 minutes before we turn to audience questions, and I'm pleased to see that, just looking in the chat, a few questions have been raised. So panel, be prepared, because I think they look harder than the questions that I'm asking you at the moment. But James, before we do that, I just want to quickly sort of explore your experience in terms of working with local communities, and particularly with empowering them, but also giving them cold hard cash to do something for their local community as well. And King's Cross, we know the area as obviously a hotbed of incredible anchor institutions, but also a real hotbed of startups and scale ups. Now, again, back to this kind of inclusive growth agenda, what you ideally would like to see is that some of those new startups coming through are indeed coming through from the local communities. So local communities having the opportunities, to create and grow their own businesses, which ultimately, can one day sit alongside the existing businesses in the KQ area. From your experience, how do you kind of make that work? What are some of the learnings you've seen over the last couple of years of your project? Like I say, particularly when you start to give communities cold hard cash and you give them the infrastructure to support them to move their ideas forward.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, yes. Remember, when the money is theirs, we don't give it to them. They make the decisions about how it's spent, and we just sort of monitor and sort of administer in the centre. And another thing to say about that is sometimes it's not the spending the cash that matters, it's having the cash, which gives the confidence and opens the door. And, some of the big local partnerships that have achieved most and have moved most quickly and have the most ambitious plans haven't actually spent a huge amount of their money, over halfway through the programme. But having said that, well, clearly improving the local economy and employment and so on is something that a lot of the communities really want to see happen. They go about it in an incredibly diverse way, and many of them do what I've been talking about, which is, they really focus on engaging the community and in fostering a sense of community and connection. And, the stuff that goes on there is everything from, a knit and natter, which, you've got people sitting around having a cup of tea knitting. Maybe they've got their kids around there as well, and that's that's bringing people into a space where they can start the process of self-realization, to community events where they're celebrating the culture of food and so on. All of those things are investing in that foundational functionality of community. You need that in order to get onto that tougher stuff. But some of that tougher stuff is, it is like giving small grants to people who've got business ideas. There's one big local partnership in Kent that has an innovation hub. They've taken on a building from the council that was disused. It used to be a supermarket. It was lying empty. They've taken it on at a peppercorn rent, and they've done it up, and they've opened it up to micro entrepreneurs. So on very, very short lease, 1 month notice, very low rent. It's an opportunity for people to try out business ideas without making that much commitment or taking that much risk. And at last count, I think there was something like 23 small businesses in the building, and they were opening up a couple of times a week for people to come in and buy stuff and so on. And 2 or 3 of those had actually made the jump and taken somewhere in the high street. They're performing that function of fostering the confidence and skills and connection that gives people an in into the local economy. In direct contrast, actually, to the council. So I haven't said exactly where it is, have I? So I think I can get away with this. Council, which spend a lot of money on building a new shopping precinct, tens of millions of pounds. So maybe 100 times what this innovation hub cost, which was then occupied by shops and so on that were from outside of the area, whose supply chains were global, and whose sort of management staff weren't sort of sited locally either. And obviously there's a space for that and there's a role for that. But in contrast to the fostering of the local stuff, somebody described it as almost like putting a big suck pipe in the middle of the town centre and switching it on and extracting the value out of the place. So just an example of how bottom up can work, basically.
That's brilliant. Thank you, James. Okay, guys, I'm going to turn to some of the audience questions. And Jane, I think this one is probably for you first off. And it's come through from Brian. So Brian, thank you for typing this up. Jane, when it comes to flexibility, there's a tension between the expectation of employees versus what employers are prepared to accommodate. Where's the tipping point where an employer can no longer provide sufficient flexibility to retain employees who want a degree of flexibility they can't be given?
That's definitely one for me. We're very clear as a charity. We know that people have employment rights, but the bottom line is that it's a relationship where you are being paid by somebody to do a job of work. So while we would encourage employers to look at the job to see what can be done flexibly and what can't be done flexibly, there will be an element of many jobs which can't be done flexibly. And that's where communication between the employee and the employer will help everybody understand what's possible and what's not possible. We think we're in a unique position as a charity because we have a free legal advice helpline. So we understand from people who are being mistreated and who are being treated illegally what the problems are. But we also work with good quality employers who show us what is possible. So it's those two views that we use to advise people. And there are jobs that need to be done in a particular way, during particular hours, at a particular place. And if you're going to take that job, then actually you need to understand that. We would argue there must be flexibility within the role, which can be tweaked, especially if you try things out first and see whether or not they work. And then, of course, the other thing about any job is that it's got to be paid properly.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jane. Okay, we've got a great question here from some students at Regents High who are listening to today's conversation. And with thanks to Richard Harrison for sending this question across. Given that the KQ is based in King's Cross, do you feel that the organisations here have a responsibility to the people who live and work here, especially the younger members of the community? And Nishma, I'm going to come to you with that question. So big anchor organisations, should they have a greater responsibility to the local community?
I think, Jack, that I think organisations have a responsibility to ensure that they are providing equal access to training facilities, etc., to enable young employees that live in the area to be equipped with the skills to be able to go into the marketplace confidently and with resilience. I think that. But it's a two-way. It's two-pronged, really. I think that young people also have to be able to, reach out. They need to go out and really make an effort as well in terms of getting the access, but also in terms of ensuring that they're equipping themselves in the best way possible to be able to take advantage of the opportunities that are open to them. And I think sometimes that there is a breakdown in that communication between both parties, and often I've seen that. So I think there's more for everybody to do.
But I think picking up on that, I mean, sort of from my experience and speaking to people in local communities who live on the doorstep of big anchor organisations, I think often they feel like there isn't that opportunity even to start with. That they are sort of locked out before they've even tried to kind of get into the front door, if you like, and if organisations are true to what they're talking about in terms of diversity and inclusion and representing all of the communities in which they belong, then they need to do more to engage those communities. Would you not agree?
I would agree, and I think a lot of there is a lot more to do. I think we all know that, but there are a lot of organisations, particularly, I can say that, Bain are offering a number of scholarships, for example, to those, who don't necessarily or historically have met the criteria, perhaps, that we would have at entry grade to join our organisation. In the same way, we are using technology to be able to, monitor individuals who perhaps wouldn't have had the same privileges as those who've been, to have had a private education or been to to Oxbridge, for example, but are extremely bright individuals who come from disadvantaged backgrounds, in underprivileged parts of the country. And what we do is we use a system which enables us to monitor what would that individual have been, had they had all the privileges across a period of time, from the time they were, we start at age 10 up until they were sort of 21, etc. And it's a very effective way of us then being able to bring people into the organisation. But Jack, this is something new that organisations have got on board with. The Black Lives Matter movement has accelerated this to some extent. And of course, all of the dialogue that we've been having on diversity and inclusion over the years, from gender to race and ethnicity and various other aspects of diversity, which are equally important. But we're not there yet. And, there is a lot more that needs to be done. I think the question is very valid in terms of how do we actually support within those local communities. And I think there's an education piece here for policymakers, government, organisations and society, where the dialogue isn't as robust as it might be.
James?
Yeah, sorry, could I just come in there? I think it's a really good question. I think that businesses often spend a lot of time and money and effort from a very good place trying to engage the local community. But I think sometimes the process doesn't work that effectively, and how businesses work with local communities can change and improve. And it is hard, but part of it is recognizing the innate power imbalance that is there. And again, part of the cue is in the terminology. Businesses engaging community, doing community engagement. On whose terms is the engagement taking place? How does it look if there's a little bit of sort of power shifting and a shift in the balance of power, and thinking, this is their community, this is our community. How do you want to, how do we engage you in decisions and so on? So looking at how to, I suppose, give the terms of engagement more to the people in the community to allow them to shape the priorities of the community more, and see how businesses can fit into that, I think is an interesting direction things are starting to move in.
Absolutely. And Jane, I'd like to come to you with the same question. And I think you mentioned at the start, you sort of questioned, do all organisations, for example, need to recruit someone that's got a degree and 3 years experience? And for a lot of people, the entry level funnel is narrowed very, very quickly, and possibly based on sort of requirements which maybe aren't needed as much anymore. Do you think that there is a case to sort of widen that funnel at the start point to enable a lot more people to access these job opportunities?
Absolutely. We would argue that a lot of that can be, that the opening up can happen through good quality job design. So if you look at the job that needs to be done, what is required in order to do that job? And there are lots of jobs which are advertised as requiring a degree, which absolutely don't need a degree. On the other hand, if you do need to have a qualification to do that job, then it's absolutely reasonable for the employer to ask for that. We've started using a blind recruitment software tool, and we found absolutely fascinating that the questions we ask within this recruitment tool are around what would you do when, how would you resolve this? And it's all very much work-based. And we've very recently, for a charity that believes in flexible work, we've recently recruited somebody who came at the top of these questions, but had actually been out of the labour market for 4 years. And we may not have put her at the top of our list of jobs, the top of our list of candidates, if we'd seen her CV first. But of course, what that means is that the person being recruited needs to know that's where they need to go to see the job. They also need to have access to IT in order to fill all of that out. So there are some challenges around that. But we do see a lot of organisations doing a lot to try and open up opportunities. And then once they have people within them, to train them as much as possible. There is this question about we can't find the people we need to fill jobs. Well, what have you been doing with your training budget for the last 10 years? Because if you cut it, No wonder there aren't the people around, because everybody else is doing the same thing.
Absolutely. And Jane, just sort of staying with you for a second, and again, it's another question that's come through. So obviously recruitment is one thing, but then retention, development and progression it is another thing. Again, once you've got people from, say, disadvantaged backgrounds, as this question asks, into these job opportunities, there is then surely a sort of a challenge or an imperative among the organisation to support those people to sort of accelerate up through the organisation as well.
Absolutely. I mean, most organisations will all organisations will absolutely want to hang on to the people that are working for them that are doing a really good job, because to replace somebody who's doing a good job is hugely expensive for an employer. There's the lost time, there's the recruitment process, there's the lack of knowledge, there's the onboarding somebody. So it is in the interests of the employer to keep that person with them. And many organizations will be putting a lot of money into training and retaining people. And there are many organizations out there that will be doing a lot to hang on to women, particularly as they become mothers, because we know there's very little gender pay gap between men and women up to age 40. It's after that it starts widening. And I think I'm right in saying that the gender pay gap is going to take 100 years to fix, which frankly is too long. But organizations do have wonderful retention, recruitment, and progression policies. But it's again about that employment relationship, is finding out what they are and trying to get into them.
Absolutely. And Nishma, you were nodding in agreement with Jane there.
On the gender pay gap piece, absolutely. Yeah. And the stats that actually quoted them were spot on in terms of, as you get sort of past that mid-career piece over 40, it's much more evident that there is a difference across both in the public sector and in the private sector. And it's, it will take us up to 100 years at the pace that we're at the moment, even with increased scrutiny, now regulation across a number of industries, and the transparency required to, sort of talk about succession planning more openly on your website, etc. But there's still a huge amount of work that needs to be done by communities, but primarily by organisations.
Absolutely, thank you. I'm conscious of the time, and I'm conscious that we have probably now over time, and I'm presuming that this is where Bav steps in and tells me to stop talking.
Thanks so much, Jack. I think we have almost run out of time. Just a minute to go before the panel officially ends. But I just wanted to say a massive, massive thank you to all of our esteemed speakers, Jane Van Zyl, James Goodman, Nishma Gosrani, and brilliantly chaired by Jack Salabank. Thank you all. We could have carried on, and like I said at the beginning, that this conference is just the first part. We want some of these conversations to carry on, and we might invite you back again to speak more directly to some of our Knowledge Quarter partners. I think there's so much we can learn from all your wealth of experience. So thank you so much. And just to also say that this conference our principal sponsor is British Land. So a massive thank you to all the good folks at British Land for continuing to support the Knowledge Quarter. It's the third year that they've sponsored this conference. I'm thrilled to invite our lightning talk speakers. If you haven't ever seen what a lightning talk is, let me tell you, they're brilliant. Each speaker has prepared 20 visual slides that will be shown for 21 seconds each on an automatic timer. Neither the speaker nor I can stop the slides once they start. Okay, the first one, we have A Drop of Hope, Poetry from a Vaccination Center by Jasmine White and Hannah Dethlefsen. Jasmine is a creative producer. She's currently head of program at the Poet in the City, where she curates and produces Poet in the City's public program of live events and projects. Co-production with artists and communities runs through the core of Jasmine's practice, and her aim is to find ways to use poetry as a tool to forge new connections across people, places, and histories. Oh, Hannah, go on, Hannah and Jasmine, off you go.
Wonderful. So we're going to talk about A Drop of Hope, which was a project in response to the vaccine program, but actually it started with a really practical problem, and that is that this gallery at the Crick, where I work, I learned in November would become a vaccine center. So at first we thought, oh no, we've lost our space, but then we realized it was a huge opportunity because we would have hundreds of people coming to the gallery every day, engaging meaningfully with science, which is what we do. And we thought, wouldn't it be great if we could highlight how they're participating in this scientific effort and how they're contributing to it as well. And so we were inspired at the Crick by art projects like these ones, where visitors to galleries make each one small contribution to a larger effort, much in the same way that a vaccine patient has just a jab, but it is one small effort in a much bigger scientific collaboration. So we took this idea and we thought, well, what could we collect? We could collect reflections on this time. So that's what we did. We collected people's reflections on the vaccine program, on the pandemic, and we shared them with Poet in the City. They commissioned 12 virtual poets in residence for us. And those poets wrote poetry in response to the voices from our community. And as those poems were written, we designed them and installed them on the outside of our vaccine center. And over the course of time, we grew an NHS rainbow-inspired display of poetry outside our vaccination center. And what we really wanted this poetry to do was to welcome our neighbors. We knew they'd be invited to come inside, and we wanted to make them feel as welcome as possible to participate. So we did some focus groups with local community groups, and really we're happy that we did, because they told us very loudly that language access was very important to them.
So I'm now going to talk a little bit about how we built inclusivity into the project. So we chose to have poetry written in English, Bengali and Sylheti, which is a Bengali dialect, and Somali, as they are the 4 core languages spoken in the local area. We decided not to translate the poetry as it's quite a lengthy process, but instead we asked the 12 poets to write an artist statement that we then translated. And as a result, we have a collection of 8 poems in English, 1 in Bengali, 1 in Sylheti, and 2 in Somali. Everyone can read these artist statements, but you can only read the poem of your language. And this has created an additional layer of inclusivity where the welcome is specific to that local language and creates a space that is just for that community. Deciding on the number of poets was also another way that we considered representation of language in the project. Rather than having 4 poets and 1 from each language, we selected 12 to nod to the diversity of voices and experiences within each language. And the final list of poets was decided on by our project steering group. And lastly, the postcards were also a crucial part of designing inclusivity into the project, embedding the exact words, thoughts, and opinions of vaccination patients into the poetry enabled us to display the artwork that would be meaningful and a genuine welcome to local people.
So how did we collect these responses from people? Well, as you came in as a vaccine patient, you received a postcard with one of these 5 prompts that were written by Poet in the City to help people to take a moment and to reflect on their experience of the last year and to share those reflections with us. And I have to tell you that even though it was building a database, it was the most joyful database that we could have built. We got over 2,600 responses. People were so thoughtful and generous with their reflections. They drew pictures, they wrote poetry. It was really lovely to see their contributions and incorporate their words into the display. And I think one thing we did learn, though, was that we could have done a better job of eliciting feedback in other languages other than English. So we had postcards in Somali and in Bangla, but we didn't end up getting feedback in these languages. So that's something I would improve for next time. But a way that we were able to include diverse voices was through those initial focus groups. We invited a couple of people from those focus groups to join our steering group, and they were involved right from the beginning right from selecting poets to reviewing the poetry to advising us on display. And so when I do see now the multilingual display of poetry outside our vaccine center, I'm really proud of our commitment to listening to those community partners and really embedding their feedback all the way through. And just a note on access as well, you see the little NaviLens QR code. That's with each poem so that people who are blind or partially sighted can listen to the poetry as well.
So yeah, as Hannah says, it's been incredible to see the response to the work so far. And each of the 12 poets have approached the work in such different ways. From taking a really personal approach, we had one poet that wrote about the death of her father, to some poets taking the postcard words as verbatim and making poems collage from all of the different collected phrases. And we can see that the variety in the poetry has meant we are reaching a really wide range of people, each connecting with one of the many different styles, tones, or emotions presented in the artwork. So you can see in this tweet of Hannah Ali's poem that it created an incredible online conversation between people who had lost someone during the pandemic. And so far, we know that over 33,000 people have seen the exhibition. Looking forward, we are really keen to build on the impact that the work is having. Poetry is a great art form for sparking discussion and creative responses. And here you can see an image of an event with London Sinfonietta, who commissioned 2 composers to set music to some of the poems from the project. There are also plans to co-create events with community partners and take the poetry into local spaces. And there are current plans for an event in the British Library Story Garden with young people to talk about the poems and have a broader conversation about the vaccination drive, what it means to them and their generation moving forward. And then lastly, we'd also love to open an invitation for partnership to all of our Knowledge Quarter colleagues. There are so many possibilities for collaboration around the poems, and we'd love to hear any ideas you might have for how the poetry could complement the work you're doing. So yeah, there's the project website link, and I think you should have our email addresses. So yeah, get in touch.
Brilliant. I have to be quicker at my intros. Thanks so much, Jasmine and Hannah. Next, we have Springer Nature, Tackling Societal Challenges with Open Research by Thea Scherer, who is Director of Group Communications and Sustainability at Springer Nature Group. Since 2017, she has led on sustainability strategy and corporate reporting, driving forward a program that measures, monitors, and works to improve the publisher's environmental and social impacts.
So thanks for that intro, Bav. I'm, as you said, Thea Scherer from Springer Nature. I'm in this short slot. I'm going to share some of the work we've been doing in support of the research effort around the pandemic and how we're working to make a difference to other pressing global challenges as part of this vibrant KQ community. I'm actually in the area today. There is a monsoon just taking place outside of the window behind me. If you don't know us, Springer Nature is a large global publisher of research, and you might have picked up our flagship journal, Nature, or the popular science magazine, Scientific American. And if not, you may have read or used books from Palgrave, Springer, or Macmillan Education. We've around 1,800 people in the UK, and most of them are based in the Knowledge Quarter. In 2019, our journal Nature celebrated its 150th birthday, and over those 150 years, society has made so much progress. So 150 years ago, only around a third of the world's population could read. Now it's the vast majority. Only around a third were free from extreme poverty, and now it's about 90%. And whereas 38 was the average life expectancy, it's now 71. And we know that research and learning are at the heart of accelerating progress. And as a publisher, our mission is opening doors to discovery by providing access to knowledge and helping researchers disseminate their findings. And in our view, open science is key to accelerating discovery. So what do we mean by that? Well, open science is about opening up every element of the research process, from sharing negative as well as the positive results of research studies, or about sharing underlying data, codes and methods for others to use, and making all of these elements instantly available. And that's important because it can drive efficiencies in and the effectiveness of the research process as a whole. I think the slides may have stuck, but I'm going to hope that they will catch up with us in a moment. The past 18 months has really provided an amazing case study of why open science matters. So during the pandemic, within a month of the first reported case of a novel coronavirus, that virus was rapidly sequenced and openly posted to GenBank, which is an open genetic sequence database. And scores of researchers shared their early findings as openly accessible preprints, where preliminary research is shared before it's peer-reviewed or published. These findings were then tested and refined in real-time discussions that were tracked publicly and transparently, and papers that didn't withstand scrutiny or couldn't be replicated and reproduced weren't taken further. And that allowed the scientific community to pursue more promising research avenues. And society and commercial publishers like us made subscription-based coronavirus articles available to all. And that COVID-19 case study really showed definitively how the daily workings of science have practical ramifications in all our lives. Scientific norms affect not just researchers working in labs, but also policymakers, doctors, patients, families, and the general public. And it's shown that open science is the form of research dissemination and global collaboration that best reduces vexing limits to knowledge. So if rapidly and openly sharing research data and papers is critical to understanding and combating coronavirus, doesn't the same hold true for other diseases, whether that's cancer, heart disease, climate change? The scientific community, moving with great speed and great clarity of purpose, have signalled that open science is the most efficient way to tackle issues that have a significant and direct effect on the lives of the general public. There's also an economic benefit to open science. For example, around the turn of the century, the massively successful Human Genome Project placed research results in the public domain, and it's estimated that between 1988 and 2010, this generated nearly $800 billion in economic benefits, and that's a return on investment of about $141 for each dollar of US federal government investment in that project. So during the pandemic, the research community and research publishers have shown that we can move really, really fast. And the pandemic led to an increase in the posting of preprints. It expedited peer review and clinical trials. There was an increase in collaboration and data sharing, and funders allowed the diversion of funds to COVID-19 research. And publishers got peer-reviewed research out faster. We stepped up really quickly to make relevant content freely accessible and other content more easily accessible off campus. So Springer Nature alone made more than 70,000 COVID-19 related papers freely available, and they've been downloaded more than 96 million times. So what can we learn from this that's relevant to other societally important areas of research? Well, it's clear that not all of those 96 million readers are other researchers or scientists. And the most recent Edelman Trust Barometer has shown a huge increase in people seeking to increase their science literacy and seek trusted sources of information. And research we've conducted with partners also tells us that about 40% of readers viewing openly accessible research come from outside of academia. The 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals set out a framework for action to solve the world's most pressing challenges. And again, science and research are key in understanding their impact and finding and delivering solutions. But progress on them is lagging. And in some cases, the pandemic has exposed gaps between the latest scientific insights and policy making. So collaboration is essential if we're to make progress on sustainability, and we think it's vital to convene policymakers and scientists, and that's an essential component of better decision making. So we do this regularly, for example, partnering with the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network to bring together UN officials, civil society leaders and policymakers to discuss the role of science, technology and public policy. And we are also signatories to the SDG Publishers Compact, which is a cross-publisher initiative to contribute to the UN's Decade of Action. Since 2015, Springer Nature's published over 300,000 research articles or book chapters on topics related to the SDGs, and these have been downloaded more than 750 million times. So, like many other KQ partners, Springer Nature is part of this global network of research and educators working to solve global challenges and connect with decision makers and the public. And the KQ really is a microcosm of that. And we feel strongly that alongside our publishing, Springer Nature needs to participate in other ways and make sure that we're making a positive contribution. So in the past 5 years, Springer Nature has published more than 40,000 articles related to climate change. So we're in no doubt about the need to take action there. We're signatories of the Climate Pledge, which means we're committed to achieving net zero 10 years ahead of the Paris Climate Agreement targets. And we achieve carbon neutrality for all of our offices, our fleet and our business flights in 2020. We've got a green office network of employees who volunteer to help identify ways to make our operations greener in London and around the world. And we've reduced the volumes of paper used in our products and almost eliminated plastic wrap in our supply chain. We're part of the KQ Sustainability Group and the UK Publishers Association Sustainability Task Force as well. And globally and locally, we're supporting access to research and education through research and partnerships. So as well as a range of employability and work experience programs for young people in the KQ, we host English and maths catch-up lessons for under 11s and operate a homework club with urban partners and other local businesses for teenagers. And we're really excited about firing that back up in September after a year's hiatus. So openness is important to us in more ways than one. It can help accelerate discovery more equitably and effectively. And we're really looking forward to being back in larger numbers in the KQ and continuing as part of this network of educators, researchers, cultural organisations and other community groups. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, thanks. Next, we have SQW, Inclusive Economies. What steps should be taken to extend the opportunity for and benefits of entrepreneurship and innovation in the KQ? We're joined by David Crichton-Miller, who's the Chief Exec Officer of the SQW Group. David, you're there. I think Jo was going to join us, but she's not able to come, so it's just you. Thank you so much, and over to you, David.
Thank you very much, and look, good afternoon to everybody. I'm planning to talk about inclusivity in the sense of drawing people from groups that don't necessarily naturally enjoy and benefit from the success of the Knowledge Quarter, but are local and maybe somewhat outside the sort of normal characteristics of the employees of the CRIC and the institutions that we've been hearing from. So inclusivity in terms of the economy. I'm a director of Oxford Innovation, which is one of the businesses of our group. We help places to thrive. We do that up and down the country in 25 or 26 different places. And we do our work by advising placemaking authorities, universities, organizations that run places like cities, towns, local authorities, to do things that will encourage economic vitality. We do this by running enterprise hubs, innovation centers with laboratories in them, and providing advice and finance to those entrepreneurs that are seeking to grow. Some of these innovation centers and enterprise hubs are very innovation rich, and they sit alongside, universities or places of scientific investment like the CRIC. Some of ours are in places like Harwell or Culham. This is at Future Space, which is at the University of West England. And the focus here is on commercializing the benefits of research to generate, spin-outs and employment for local people, or to help businesses connect with the research that is going on in that locality. Some of the enterprise hubs that we run are run in more challenged places. This one is Ashton-under-Lyne in Greater Manchester, an area of reasonable economic deprivation. And in these places, our focus is on retaining or building on the enterprise activity of an area, perhaps trying to build a cluster of businesses and high value jobs that might not otherwise stay there. These ones might go to central Manchester or to London, but if you can build a cluster of good jobs there, then that will be good for the area. I'm going to show a few pictures of buildings in the course of this talk, but as we all know, economic inclusivity is actually about people and what might draw people towards joining or starting a business or growing a business. And in this particular conference, it's about drawing in people who might not normally walk towards a business centre. So what is a successful, I'm going to talk about this in 3 layers. What is a successful hub for business? What it is it's a place where lots of innovation goes on. It offers lots of different types of jobs. Typically, it's associated with growth for an area. It's very sort of dynamic in the sense that small businesses come and go, but they therefore renew an area, and it gives real economic vitality. How do you run one? Well, you basically run one by marketing to attract and select a great group of small businesses, and you curate them. You animate the place with events related to business success, things like how to pitch, how to run a board, how to hire people, and you do it in scale so that you have lots of people, because small businesses gain a great deal of network benefit from being around one another and from learning from one another. So this curation generates, an economically vital hub at the center of a community. The next layer that you might bring to this in order to address some of the economic challenges of an area would be about targeting specific local needs. How do you do that? Well, you would be trying to build a greater diversity of your businesses, particularly diversity of owners. You'd like people who are from lots of different backgrounds. You'd also probably like more startups, and you'd probably like to target this at the local groups that are most excluded from the local economy. How do you do that? Well, you can adopt tiered pricing structures for companies moving in. You can be free for 3 months for people from certain ethnic groups. You could run accelerator or startup programs for people from particular groups. You provide on-site business support focused on helping them, and you develop the network into those communities. This is an example of a young person's group. They're all, young people leaving school and university, and you target startup programs to help them get into the world of work. I'm now going to talk about the last layer, which is the one I think most relevant to the Knowledge Quarter, which is how do you reach into those groups that are not naturally walking towards that kind of a place? They don't naturally feel comfortable in that sort of a business setting. And what we're after here is greater inclusion in the enterprise sector, more people in jobs and work and businesses. And actually you get better businesses from this. And the objective is to have impact on the people and communities that do not typically walk towards the smart offices that we see in parts of the Knowledge Quarter. And this is really the heart of my talk, which is how do you achieve this? And the answer is through proactive outreach. You have to talk about enterprise in schools with young people before they're leaving schools. You need to bring entrepreneurial role models into those schools. And you need to actively provide work placements with the businesses in your innovation centres. This picture is a picture of one of our innovation centres in Belfast. Not all of our innovation centres do we have the funding to do this kind of outreach, but some of them we do, and this is one where we do. It's in a really tough part of Belfast, an area of special economic deprivation. This is 3 members of our team, and the guy in the middle here, Shane, has specific responsibility for outreach. And he reaches into these communities to spur entrepreneurship in communities that typically have high levels of unemployment and multi-generational unemployment. He builds links with entrepreneurs and schools, with teachers so that their classes come into the Innovation Centre for lessons from entrepreneurs. We encourage our occupying businesses to offer work placements to kids from the local schools. And I'm going to tell you a story. One of the kids we ran an enterprise course with then came and did a work placement with one of the businesses in the business centre. He came in and he did a little social media project for a business that was a sort of tech-enabled recruitment business. He really enjoyed it. They thought he was great, and he came back and worked for them after he left school, 17. And a couple of years later, the owner planned to retire, and this young lad had made such an impression on them, the owner ended up selling the business to this young lad. That business has then grown so substantially that they have recently celebrated by moving out of our innovation centre into a bigger office of their own. But to me, that is inclusion in a nutshell, bringing somebody who might not have looked towards enterprise, starting a business, making a success of one, and did. So an inclusive approach is about finding the people, the entrepreneurship that does exist within a community but needs some help in order to get there. And I believe a modest investment in this kind of outreach with targeted accelerator programs can make a real difference in the Knowledge Quarter to drawing in those communities who are very adjacent to it, but who are not yet directly benefiting from what flourishes in the main institutions of the Knowledge Quarter. So we're Oxford Innovation. We're about helping places to thrive. Different places have different challenges. The Knowledge Quarter is a sensational place, but there are some communities that need additional help to ensure that they benefit from that thriving. Thank you.
There we go. Brilliant. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, David. Our final lightning talk is with Westminster Kingsway College. A new deal for young people, why careers education is more important than ever, your role on your road to recovery. Now, we should be joined by Jasbir Sundhi.
Hi, Bav. How are you?
Hi, Jasbir. Over to you. Your presentation started.
Thank you so much. I actually don't feel I need to do my presentation now. David's covered so much of it in his earlier presentation just before mine. So it's really great to hear David highlighting the importance of outreach work. What I'm going to focus on today really is a new deal for young people and why careers education is so important to London's road to recovery, really. It's all based upon the Mayor of London's 9 recovery missions, and the mission that we're going to be focusing on today really is that new deal for young people. And so really the reasons why, London is a really young city. About 2.7 million of Londoners are aged under 25. However, 40% of London's children live in households experiencing poverty. And when I think about our college communities and where our learners come from, so many of them come from, backgrounds with multi-generational unemployment. They haven't always had access to the opportunities that their peers might have, haven't really had access to the careers education, the insights into industry. And as you can sort of see from this, the majority of the learners at Capital City Colleges Group really do come from the highest sort of levels of deprivation in the country, really, the top 10 most deprived wards in England. So we've got a number of learners that come from affluent wards. However, predominantly they are from those deprived communities. So the starting point for a number of our learners is much lower than their peers, and those learners definitely within the independent sector. And what we found, and research has shown, that those learners have an opportunity to work with employers actually are less likely to become NEET. And the statistics are phenomenal, actually. 18% more than peers who had no engagement or no sort of encounter with an employer. So all of the work that we've been doing at WKC, Westminster Kingsway College, is based around the Gatsby benchmarks. And what we've done over the past sort of 3 to 4 years is really embedded careers across the curriculum. And it's not sort of careers as we would see in the traditional sense of a corridor and somebody walks down it. It really was about opening up their eyes to the world of work and just making sure that every learner had an opportunity to engage with an employer, whether it's via an industry insight, through a mentor, through a careers interview, or through work experience. Because what we found year in, year out is so many of our learners, they actually come in with career aspirations, but they have nothing in common with the labour market, and employer engagement really does make such a difference to young people. And we've experienced firsthand just how phenomenal the difference is, and how it does lead on to those positive destinations, which are also important for our learners. The aspirations aren't always around university. It's the human capital, it's the social capital, and it's the cultural capital, which they don't always have access to. They don't have those employer networks, they don't have friends or families that they can sort of always turn to. And that's where employer engagement to us is actually sometimes so much more important than their actual qualification. We used to sort of refer to them as those softer skills. They're no longer those softer skills. They're those essential skills. Skills like diplomacy, authenticity, empathy, which they're not always going to learn within the classroom. And what they want to do is have that shared sense of experience. And again, there's some more statistics here. So as you can see, learners who have no employer contacts have more chance of becoming NEET, so not in education or employment, whereas it rises significantly to 74% of learners engage and go on to positive destinations. And actually at WKC, that's now increased at 98%. So ever since we sort of changed our careers program, started working with agencies like Career Ready and Investment 2020, we found that we've opened up a world of opportunities for our learners. And we're really proud that 98% of them now go on to positive destinations. We've worked really hard setting KPIs for all of our curriculum areas because it is a two-way partnership. I think for too long it's been around, okay, employers come in and they can do this, and there wasn't anything in return for our employees. So we've worked really hard with our employers that we work with currently to make sure that it's beneficial mutually. And here's some examples of the ways in which employers have helped us. And I think traditionally employers feel it's around that work experience, it's around sort of those work placements, but it's not. It's so much more. It can be an employer talk, it could be around mentoring or internships, it could be a virtual talk. And I think for us, we were really worried that COVID and the pandemic was going to sort of stop a lot of that enrichment activity that we do with our learners, but far from it actually. As you can see from the figures here, we've had so much engagement and we are so fortunate, yet we have 3,300 learners just at WKC, and then across the group, we're looking at around 15,000 young people who need to work with employers. So it's a huge number of learners who need those encounters. And as you can again see here, the difference that employers and organisations do make to the lives of our learners, who do then go on to progress onto really sort of positive destinations once they've engaged with yourselves. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jazz. That was fantastic. Yeah, those slides do creep up very quickly, don't they? Look, a big thank you to all of our Lightning Talk speakers, to Jasmine White, Hannah Dethlefsen, Thea Scherer, David Crichton-Miller, and Jazz Sondi. So thank you all absolutely fascinating, very interesting stories there. And I think they were all the better for being 7 minutes and not any longer. Now, as I said before, we... While the Lightning Talks were going on, while the networking was going on, a group of students from Regent High were having their own roundtable discussion, discussing the theme of the day. A big thanks to Richard Harrison at Regent High for organising everything. I think we have a photo of what it looked like. That's it. That's them when they were having their discussion a little while ago. This is fantastic, brilliant. And I believe we're joined by Saira Tasnim, who was a former student at Regent High. I think Saira is not quite there yet, so she'll join us in a second. Another thing that we've been doing throughout today is that we've had a poet. Boyega Odubanjo has been listening in on the last 2.5 hours, 2 hours, 45 minutes of our conference, and he's been very, very carefully writing down his points, and he's now going to put them together and string a lovely poem, a poetic chronicle of the day. Thanks so much, Boyega. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Over to you.
That's perfect. Thank you very much. Hello. It's been very decent listening to all of the talks and the conferences and the chats that have gone on throughout today. I've written something. I'm going to read it. Thank you kindly. Zoom, camera, action. The orchestra takes the stage as one they move as if it is one light that holds and guides them all. This baroque in a time that feels broken, acting as the first building block for us towards something hopeful. Everywhere around us are buzzwords and slogans. How can we be flexible enough to access something sustainable enough to be the foundation of an inclusive, post-COVID, pre-COVID, well-mobilized, multilingual, rebuilt, reimagined drop of hope filled with lived experience and a living wage? Who do we turn to when authorities turn away? Where do we find joy when home becomes office, creche, lunch hall, playground, battleground? When your home is compromised and from the taps flow emails, where in the fridge there is nothing but alarms, where do you rest? When Goliath knocks, faceless and moneyed, who else but your neighbors can hold you? whether via touch or smile, helping hand or open door. What else but community can bring us together? I step out, I log on, and I see a crossing, a mile, a bridge to travel through, and a hope that these are steps we take together, like some orchestra, some group of dancers. Cheers.
Wow, powerful words. Thank you so much, Boyega. I didn't get a chance to introduce you in all the excitement, so very quickly, Boyega was born and raised in East London. He's the author of 2 poetry pamphlets, While I Yet Live and Auntie Uncle Poems. He's an editor of the poetry magazine Bath Mag. There we go, fantastic. Thank you for those wonderful words that you've strung together in a matter of seconds after listening in for the last couple of hours. Okay, I think we now have Saira Tasnim. Hey, Saira, thank you. Thanks for being. Now, please, you've got loads of time. Share with us what your group has been talking about.
I'm here with Regent High School, and we were just doing a discussion on the future of working, and it was in response to the keynote address as well as the plenary session. And what we found is that these institutions, these global institutions, all have amazing ideas to present opportunities. And there are many students who also want to take advantage of these opportunities. But for both of us, we have these intentions, but we're not able to meet in the middle, because these kids are primarily 16 to about 18 or 19. And these institutions have all existed far longer than most of us have been alive. And we just feel like they're too big and too scary for us to step up to. And the way it's set is that we have to take advantage of these opportunities, but many times they feel like they're just too great for us to access directly and for us to be allowed to access. So we feel that one way in which we can make the future of knowledge accessible to all people is to simply have these institutions present them to us or the school directly, and to just say, these opportunities are for you and they are accessible for you. However, we also acknowledge that we do have some responsibility in that we do need to become a bit more confident and a bit more active in pursuing these opportunities we desire. Something else we looked at is that throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, we did quite a lot of at-home learning, and we found that whilst it was very difficult for us to exist in a place where our school environment and our home environment seemed to warp and become one, we did feel that we didn't ever get a break or a chance to kind of step back and relax. However, we did also find that these opportunities and these times did teach us to be independent, not just for school and learning, but also preparing us for university and then later work. In fact, the vast majority of the panel did say that they felt these at-home learning sessions did make them feel like they could move on to do work at home in their future, even beyond the pandemic. However, many people all throughout agreed that it wasn't possible to do it just at home learning or just at home work from home or just on-site working. They felt that it was only fair to have a balance because people work differently. Some people want to work at home totally at their own pace. Sometimes they want to come onto site and be working in some form of structure around other people, because at its core, sociability and socially meeting and seeing people face to face is what makes humans tick. They did feel that as such, these things do exist as a concept, in that they're very far off. They're not something we can tangibly touch or understand or realistically feel. But we do feel like working together with these institutions, having them ask us questions, having them listen to us and take our advice on board would make it something that we can actively take part in and actively be a member of, as opposed to just one institution out of 106 that exists in name and not in direct practice.
Fantastic, Saira. There's so much there. I was like, we were trying to write notes, but fortunately we're recording this so we can go back and listen to those points. Please thanks all the students who are there with you, who've been listening in to our conference. Absolutely thrilled that you could take part in this. Tomorrow we've got another group of young people from the Story Garden who are going to be doing a similar thing. And on the last day, we've got students from Haverstock School as well. So we're really thrilled that young people can be a part of this conference in a way that we've not been able to do in previous years. So thanks again, Saira. We've had a wonderful day, lots of conversations. I think those of you who've been here from the start, probably a little bit now ready to go and, stretch your legs, get a cup of tea or something like that. But before we do that, let's hear some final words from Jodie Eastwood, who is the Chief Exec of the Knowledge Quarter. I know she's been looking forward to saying some words at the end. So over to you, Jodie.
Thank you, Bav. Wow, what a day. Thank you for joining the first day of our 3-day conference. Working together has indeed been a fascinating topic to explore for us all. And as Bav mentioned, I wanted to reflect on a couple of key themes that we've seen today. Also followed up by quite an extensive list of thanks, and I hope you will stay for that and some information about tomorrow. So firstly, we've heard about the importance of co-creation within our communities, opening up dialogue and developing meaningful relationships with people that live in close proximity to our organisations, and how we can facilitate that to create some really compelling change. Secondly, the accessibility of employment opportunities and how businesses can reframe their hiring processes. We have to consider things like flexible working, definitely paying fair wages and providing learning opportunities for that wide, broad group of individuals that populate our innovation district and those across the UK. And finally, the importance of listening. And I think this is really important. Not just listening, but listening with the intent, not just box tick, but to act on the questions and challenges identified by our communities, enabling communities to shape our work and priorities going forward. And if that's one key thing that we can take away from our fabulous keynote at the beginning of the day, Kajal, is to listen and to listen intently to our communities. So on to the big list of thanks. I want to thank our keynote and panel speakers, so Kajal Adedra from UK, from Change.org, Jack Salabank, who kindly chaired the panel discussion for us from Future Places, and the participants of that panel, James Goodman, Jane Vansel, and Nisharan Gosrani. I want to thank the youth panel. As Bav mentioned, I think that it's so important that we have the youth voice being echoed within our conversations, and hopefully be able to take away some learning lessons. And I want to thank Cyrus for contributing and moderating the group. I want to thank all the lightning talk speakers, so Jasmine White, Hannah from the Francis Crick, Jazz from Westminster Kingsway, Thea from Springer Nature, David from SQW, and Joe from Oxford Innovation. I want to thank our amazing poet chronicler, Boyega, for kindly sharing those beautifully composed words with us to help us really think in a creative way about our activities today. And I also want to thank Poet in the City for their help in finding Boyega for us. I want to thank our sponsor, British Land. As Bav mentioned at the start of the day, British Land have been long-time supporters of the Knowledge Quarter, and this is the 3rd conference that they've sponsored. Without their support, it would have been difficult, especially moving to virtual. So we thank them for all of their support in delivering such an amazing first day of 3. I think really importantly, I want to thank the conference team, the KQ team, particularly to Bav and to Mia, who have been tirelessly behind the scenes, making sure that everything runs to schedule and dealing with technical hiccups when they come on board. And our chair, Simon Kane, and all of our board members for coming along today. And Millard and the Hublot team who have been helping with our technical stuff. So if you've enjoyed today, please invite your colleagues to join us tomorrow. We've got some amazing speakers lined up. Our keynote, Raymond Androbus, MBE, who's a poet and teacher, Dr. Carol Hondon from Quorum, Josh Hillman, who's the Director of Education at the Nuffield Foundation, Lord David Willits from Resolution Foundation, Omar Salha from the Ramadan Tent Project. We have another youth panel that's taking place at Story Garden, 4 more lightning talks from other KQ partners, such as the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment, The Place, the Royal Veterinary College and Regent's Place. So I will see you all tomorrow, again at 1 p.m. Please do share the link and the invite from today's conference to encourage all of your colleagues to attend. And thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to spend with us on the future of working together as part of Knowledge Quarter Conference 2021. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Jodie. Now, when we started the session today, there was rain, there was clouds, but right now the sun has come out. So that's code for all of us to go and enjoy ourselves. Have a lovely afternoon. We're going to see you all tomorrow. Please do invite any of your friends, any of your colleagues who might enjoy the session. See you at 1 o'clock tomorrow. Thanks and all the best.